Welcome everyone, and today we are going to present on building a strategy for optimizations of Azure environments. We're going to discuss security, cost, performance, and support. Today presenting is Aman. I will let him introduce himself, and my name is Eric Bogenschuetz.
Thanks, Eric. I'm a five-time MVP. I'm very passionate about all things technical, especially related to Microsoft Azure. I have presented around various events. I'm an ex-Microsoft employee, currently a principal architect at Lunavi. You can follow me on my blog, Harvesting Clouds, or my YouTube channel, or the Twitter information that is on the screen right now.
My name is Eric Bogenschuetz. I currently work for Eversource Energy, which is the largest energy provider in the New England area. I am the senior cloud domain architect. We have a couple other as well that work at Eversource. I am the lead architect there. I design and operate Azure environments, so everything from start to finish of architecture all the way through implementation. So welcome everyone, and with that said, we're going to go ahead and kick off the agenda for today. We're going to start with an introduction, followed by building a strategy, our security optimization information, cost and performance optimizations, support and management optimizations, and then some next steps that you guys can take after this session of how to proceed from here. With that said, we're going to post a poll in the chat, and it's going to discuss which aspects you think is most important for optimizations in your organization. So is that security, cost, performance, or support and management? Just take some time, take a moment as I begin to review and comment your thoughts. It would be great to see what everybody's opinion is.
And if you're watching this later on YouTube, so feel free to comment below what you think is the most important pillar when it comes to optimizations.
Perfect. So we're going to kick it off with optimizations are key. So anybody that operates an environment in Azure has oftentimes experienced cost creep. It's a thing most of us are familiar with really any cloud. During the research that we did for this presentation, we reviewed a lot of different documents, and one of the estimates that we found was that enterprise were missing out on approximately 24 billion in cloud spend annually. Some of the reasons for that was the data just showed us a lack of visibility across cloud environments. Cloud consumers could not get a good view of their cloud costs, and ultimately that resulted in delays, reduced agility, and hindered their ability to maximize the value that they brought with the cloud by creating inefficiencies, extra management overhead, etc. Some of the other items that we need to consider is that small security vulnerabilities can create serious impact. So we always need to be cognizant about security when designing any solution. And any supportability issues that you have, we need to address them. So unmanaged systems can become support nightmares, out-of-date infrastructure can become nightmares, etc. It's always good to keep on top the concept of measure twice, cut once. The cloud is a continuous evolution. So as we look at the cloud, there's changes that happen daily. So new features, new functionality is constantly being released. Following the well-architected framework is imperative to success in any cloud, and really each vendor has its own version of this. In Microsoft, there's 5 pillars. Those pillars are the operational excellence, building for performance, reliability, cost, and optimizations, and then lastly, security. We're going to touch on these ones today. At the base, the framework is really what we need to be thinking about, which is critical to success. So leveraging the cloud adoption framework, if you haven't ever looked at that, is important. Microsoft does have this well documented. And at the end of today's presentation, we're going to have this deck available. And then also there is a whole bunch of links at the end that do have the cloud adoption framework, along with the 5 pillars that we talked about before, with documentation from Microsoft and how to leverage them. So one of the things that's important is that any journey, we need to make sure, again, this framework that we follow. So ensuring that migrations to the cloud make sense, ensuring that new builds in the cloud are the right thing to do. And as part of this journey, we need to make sure that we have the proper support plan in place. So that means regular reviews, having an approved responsibility matrix or RACI, and having a well-defined support structure. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Aman for our first building block strategy.
Thanks, Eric. So the topic of this session is building a strategy for periodic optimization of Azure environments. You can't do that without having a strategy. And to build a strategy that is customized for your organization, instead of us giving you a particular strategy, what we are going to give you are building blocks and recipes. We will look at the optimization for each of the 4 pillars that we talked about. And now we are going to focus on the building blocks, which will give you all the tools necessary to build a strategy at your organization. So what are these building blocks? Number one, you want to have automation in place. You want to have scripts in terms of Azure CLI or PowerShell scripts. You can have automation in form of logic apps, but you need to have some form of automation and scripts ready, which will help you to perform all the reviews, all these periodic optimizations in an automated fashion. You also want automated periodic reports or email digests that gets created and sent to your inbox periodically. We will look at one of the type of email digest, how you can enable it, and that is readily available out of the box from Azure. We'll also look at automated alerts and action groups. So automated alert is something that will alert you if something goes wrong in your environment. An action group is how you get notified and then you take remediation action in a reactive fashion to those particular alerts. So the first 2 items, they help you in a proactive way, whereas the third item, it helps you in a reactive way. You also want to have a solidified RACI metrics. You want to know if something goes wrong in a particular area with a particular product, who is responsible for that, who is accountable for that, who should be consulted, and who should be informed. Having that solidified RACI metrics at your organization is key in having these reviews successfully organized and executed. As we said, you need to identify what to optimize. And when you are identifying those, you want to put those into one of the 4 buckets. It will either be an item related to security, cost, performance, or from the perspective of long-term support and maintenance. The last item is something that we have seen gets missed a lot, but it's equally important nonetheless. Now, deciding on frequency, how frequently you should perform all these optimization reviews. The frequency could vary from one organization to another. The frequency also varies from the type of optimization that you want to run. These are the 4 very common type of frequencies. We have not seen anything that needs a daily frequency. Monthly, quarterly, biannual, and annual are the key types of frequency that we have seen. Eric, can you share some examples related to these frequencies?
Yeah, definitely, Aman. So if we take a look at the frequencies, some of the things to consider again is what type of optimization you're doing. So annually, an example might be you perform an Azure AD access review. If you're looking at biannually, you might do an in-depth security review of all of your resources and making sure that your templates are up to spec with how your security at your organization is configured. On a quarterly basis, you might do certificate expirations or app service renewals and making sure that the secrets are not expired or your Key Vault certificates are not expired. And then on a monthly basis, you might look for items related to orphaned resources to renew those or remove those. So an example there might be you decommission a virtual machine and you forgot to delete the disks, or you forgot to delete the backup associated with that virtual machine.
Thanks, Eric. And some of those tasks can overlap. For example, the monthly task, when you are doing that quarterly, it will overlap with the third monthly tasks that you are going to perform. And similarly, the biannual can overlap with the quarterly and monthly as well.
Exactly. So the next thing that you want to do is you want to set up a review process. So that review process may be as simple as a report and an email that gets generated. You might take that a next step further, and you might do what Aman had mentioned before and create your automation and your scripts that pull that data. But one of the easiest ways, and we're going to go into this in a little while during some of the demos that we do, is the out-of-the-box digest that Azure has within Azure Advisor. We're going to show that later today. So what you want to do is you want to set up your report, you want to generate it, and you want to email it out to the parties that are in your RACI matrix of who's responsible for that area. You want to review, you want to take some time, you want to look at the recommendations that are sent out, you want to make sure that they make sense, that you need to remediate them. And then you want to take step 3 and you want to actually do that remediation. From there, you're going to do the cleanup, do the fix, do the remediation of that resource or that certain product that you're reviewing. And then number 4 is really to add your policies in place. So Azure Policy is a huge thing. You can do it and you can actually stop these from happening next time. So as you start to identify what you find in 2 and 3, you can add them into number 4 into your policies, or if they're not a policy item, you can add them into an Azure Automation Runbook or a Logic app to just remediate them when they occur.
Absolutely. So now that we have talked about building a strategy, so what exactly gets reviewed, what exactly gets monitored against which the report gets generated, we'll do a deep dive into those areas, starting with the security optimizations. When it comes to security optimizations, we have created a list of the simple recipes, the items that are absolutely must that you want to optimize, that you want to review periodically. And that list starts with these particular items. Starting with privileged identity management. You want to leverage PIM in your environment. Instead of giving administrator access for any particular area to end users, you want to leverage privileged identity management so that they elevate themselves for a limited number of hours or minutes. And then after that time, once they have done their job, that role gets taken from them. They only get that role when required. Similarly, multi-factor authentication is a easy one. You want to have that enabled at least when you're using privileged identity management and somebody is trying to elevate themselves, you want to ensure that they have been authenticated through multi-factor authentication. Conditional access is another one. You want to have that enabled in your environment for your tenant so that the person, if the credential gets compromised, a malicious person, they do not get the access. Azure AD access review is one of the critical pieces that you want to execute in your environment from time to time. Azure AD access reviews make sure that people who have left the company, they no longer have the access. It also makes sure that only the people who require access have access. How it works is you have a AD group, you perform an access review wherein you check in with all the members of that group, whether they still want to be part of that group or not, and whether they have a business justification for being part of that group or not. Their access is taken away if they do not respond or they do not have business justification. Rule-based access control review is something that is absolutely must, has to be part of your periodic reviews that you perform on the environment. You want to review membership and access of individuals and AD groups. It is very important and a good practice to not give individual users access to anything within Azure. Instead, always try to leverage AD groups. This would also ensure that along with performing RBAC access in an easier way than focusing on individual roles, you have Azure AD access reviews to perform validation of the membership of those AD groups. Managed entities and app registrations. Many times we have seen an app registration gets created for a proof of concept. The app registration or a managed entity is provided an access to various resources within your subscription. The proof of concept gets over, the resources gets deleted, but the app registration somehow remains, and the access that has been granted to that app registration remains. It is equivalent to granting access to somebody who is no longer at your organization. So you want to ensure that you review this periodically and revoke that access when not required. Custom role is another one. You want to leverage, you want to use principle of least privilege, which means you want to grant access only that is required. Any access that end user does not require, you do not want to grant them unintentionally. The out of the box or built-in roles that are there, sometimes they grant additional access. For example, access to create support requests. If you don't want to grant that, you can leverage custom roles. Creation of custom role is very, very easy. We'll look at that in one of our demo. Proceeding ahead to strengthen the security, you want to leverage Microsoft Defender for Cloud. That is one-stop shop for all things security within Azure environment. So Microsoft Defender for Cloud is your go-to place. It has a free tier, which gives you a lot of insights into your environments from security perspective. It also had a paid tier, which gives you additional features. For example, just-in-time VM access, adaptive controls, network map, and dependency. We won't look at Microsoft Defender for Cloud in depth because we can talk about that in a session of its own. We'll focus on other items during our demos. Microsoft Sentinel is another one. Microsoft Sentinel, it's Microsoft's way to integrate with third-party security solutions like third-party network virtual appliances like Palo Alto, Checkpoint, etc., and gain insight into the complete security infrastructure at your environment. Any public IP in your environment is a window to the external world. You want to ensure that that is justified via business requirement. If there is no business requirement, there should not be a public IP in your environment. You also want to review NSG configurations. They go hand in hand with the firewall rules. Any NSG out there or firewall configurations out there, you want to ensure that there is no extra port, extra IPs that are open to the external world, especially, or anything extra other than what you require, what your business requirements require. You also want to enable soft delete in your environment, which prevents against accidental deletion. Soft delete ensures that even if somebody accidentally deletes a resource, you have a way to recover from that. You have a way to recover all your data. Now let's jump into the Azure portal and look at some of these in action. So we'll start with privileged identity management. To search that, one of the tips is instead of typing the whole word, you can type PIM, short form for privileged identity management for Azure AD. Now in here, you can click on my roles to see what kind of roles you have. Or if you want to grant somebody else access to a role, you can go to Azure AD roles. Now in here, you can click on assign eligibility, or you can click on roles and see what are the different roles available. For example, for this particular demo, I'll focus on Azure DevOps Administrator, which grants somebody access as a DevOps administrator. Now here I have two choices. One, I can click on add assignments and I can grant somebody access to this particular role. The role is auto selector. All I need to do is select a member from the AD group and then add that person to this particular role. When that person logs in, they will need to elevate themselves by navigating to privileged identity management and say, I want to leverage Azure DevOps Administrator. Now, do you want to have an approval workflow when the end user requests? For example, here I have added Eric, and for how long that role gets activated. All that is there under the setting for this particular Azure AD role. I'll click on this settings and it loads up all the different settings, including activation, assignment, notification settings. Activation means how long this role gets activated, whether the approver is required or not. You can simply click on this edit button and go through this particular wizard, which will talk about all this setting and give you a flexibility to set up all these settings. For example, when Eric raises a request to elevate himself, that request gets auto approved because this required approval to activate is not selected. And I can reduce the limit to 2 hours. That means when Eric elevates himself, he will get this role only for 2 hours. After that, he will need to elevate himself again.
So this goes right in line with the concept of least privilege. So with least privilege, you also want to do the limited amount of time that the user needs to perform that action. So when you're modifying your Azure AD roles, you want to consider that as well. Not only who can do what, but how long they can do it for, and if you need to notify anybody before they're going to do it, or if you want to make them put in a ticket, you can have them do that and have them require ticket information or a justification when they submit it. Some examples of that justification: you may integrate with a third-party tool like Splunk, and you might want to have any elevation of PIM reported to Splunk with a valid justification. And if it doesn't have something valid typed, you might open a security alert.
Absolutely. And in this demo, we are just scratching the surface, giving you enough so that you know that this tool is out there. If you are interested in one of the future sessions, we can go in depth and look at under the hood how everything gets taken care of when it comes to PIM. Now, jumping into the second demo, we want to talk about custom roles. To do that, what I'll do is I'll navigate to my subscription and will navigate to IAM. Now in here, earlier, the only choices you had were add role assignment, add co-administrator. Now this choice to add custom role is there in the GUI as well. Earlier, custom role creation ability was only through the scripting. And anything you want to add, Eric?
Yeah, I think when you're doing a custom role, one of the important things to remember as Aman goes through this is right now he selected a subscription. You can also select multiple different targets. So you could do a custom role that's available at the subscription. You could do a custom role that's available at different locations. And then also from your baseline permission at the bottom, you can see that clone role, start from scratch, or start from JSON. So if you had something already existing in a old one that you did via the old method of PowerShell and your JSON template, you could import it here, and then you could have it available to modify via the GUI. Or if you had an existing role from Azure that you wanted to modify, you could start from cloning a role and then remove or add additional permissions where required.
Absolutely. And in this particular example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a VM operator with a reduced access. I'm going to take away the support permissions. I'm going to only give access to start and stop the VM. So I'm going to start from scratch. In the next screen is where you add all those permissions. You have two options, either to add permissions or exclude permissions. Let's look at add permissions first. So in here, what I'll do is I'll search for Microsoft.compute. I'll click on this box. And then since I know my API is virtual machines, so I'll search for that. I'll hide these virtual machine scale set. And I'll search for the exact match, which is Microsoft.compute/virtual machines, which applies to the VMs. Now in here, the access I want to give is them read access, starting the VM, power off the VM, and deallocate. These are the only access I want to grant as a VM operator for this particular role. Now, in addition, you can also do exclude permissions. Exclude permissions works the opposite way. These are the permissions that are absolutely not given when a person is granted this particular role.
Hey, Aman, I believe your screen share stopped moving. Now it caught up.
All right. So I was talking about add permissions and then exclude permissions. Add permission, what we just did. Exclude permission, if I select anything here, it gets added as not action. The add permissions get selected as action. Not action means whenever a user is provided this particular role, it will be guaranteed that they will not be able to do this particular operation. I randomly selected one. Uh, if I wanted to keep this role simple, I will just go ahead and delete that particular non-action. Next, I'll select the scope at which this particular role can be assigned. If I select the scope at subscription level, that would mean that any resource group, any resource within the subscription uh, member can be assigned this particular role on that particular resource group or a resource within this particular subscription. Here I have the type as management group, which is the highest level above the subscription. And then I have subscription and resource group. So I can go as below as a resource group and then define this particular resource as at the resource group level as well. For now, I'll discard that, hit next. It will show me the JSON. It will show me the JSON for all the actions that I defined. I do not have any not actions, data actions, or not data actions. These are what you selected when we were in the permission screen. You can copy this and deploy this particular custom role through DevOps pipeline, or you can simply click ahead and click on create to create this particular role in your environment. So that is all there is to it. Now this role will be available. If I want to grant somebody access add role assignment, I will be able to see this particular VM operator role. So this is the role we just created. I can select this role. You can see the type is a custom role instead of a built-in role, and hit next and grant somebody access to this role. Last demo I want to show you is the soft delete. Soft delete is a feature that is available now for many different types of resources. One of that type is recovery services vault. Storage account is another one. Your key vault is another one as well. Every resource has this setting in a different place. For recovery services vault, it is hidden under properties. So when you come under properties, you go to security settings and click on update. This is where you will see this security setting for soft delete. Once enabled, it will make sure that if for Azure VM, SQL Server in Azure VM, and SAP HANA in Azure VM, if they get accidentally deleted, that protected backup item gets accidentally deleted, then their backup will remain for around 14 days, and you will be able to recover that particular backup data as well. Now I'll switch it back to Eric to talk about other security optimizations.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Let me go ahead and share up my screen. So as we take a look, Aman covered a bunch of important ones. We talked about access, we talked about security, we talked about a bunch of different features there and went through that nice demo. Other security features that you need to consider when optimizing Azure is leveraging Key Vault. So that's a big one. You never want to store any app settings, any web config files, anything like that. You never want to store passwords in them. So any connection strings, any passwords, any authentication information should never be in app config settings or flat files, etc. Should always leverage Key Vault for that. In addition, when you're storing in Key Vault, you should always make sure that wherever possible, you're setting an expiration on your secret and on your certificate. That'll help make sure that anything that's in your Key Vault does stay relevant. Looking at app registrations we talked about a little while ago, but depending on when you started using app registrations, Microsoft used to let you have them never expire. Now they put the limit at 2 years, which is good. I would always recommend less than 2 years, though, just to make sure that what you're using an app registration for is actually still a valid reason to use it. So if you do have any app registrations that are set to never expire, you want to renew those secrets and make them a shorter period of time. And then you also want to review the access on those to make sure that your app registration has the proper access, not that you're granting additional access, just like you would with any other identity. Going over to policy. So Azure Policy is an important one. You always want to leverage policies wherever possible. So policy exemptions should be used instead of turning off the policy whenever you need to get around. And then the last one on here for other optimizations would be for your storage accounts. You always want to disable anonymous access unless you absolutely need it. So that is a big vulnerability that is on Azure Storage, is the ability to anonymously authenticate to blobs. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to a demo, and we're going to talk about how to do that last one for anonymous access to a blob. So here you can see the Azure portal. What I'm going to do is go ahead and navigate to a storage account. In our storage account, under our settings, we have a configuration tab here. Right here, allow blob public access, you can see is disabled. So this is essentially, if it is enabled, it is granting you the ability to create a container and a blob that can be accessed anonymously. By turning this off or setting it to disabled, it forces any user of storage to not be able to create the container type of public to be able to then authenticate anonymously. So what we did to do this is we force this on all storage accounts by using an Azure policy. Right now, there's a policy in place where if I try to enable this, it will automatically disable it for us. So I'm going to go ahead and disable or enable it. Go ahead and click Save. You'll see that it looks like it's updating. It'll complete the operation. And then if you refresh, it'll go right back to disabled. This is again done by an Azure policy. If I navigate to Azure Policy, and we click on Assignments, I'm going to go ahead and look for blob. We have Disable Blob Public Access. So if I open this up, we have the ability to view that definition of what it's doing. But we also have the ability, if we have a valid use case for it, to create an exception. So right here, we have Create Exemption. Under this creation, we want to make sure that we utilize, again, the concept of least privilege or least timeline. So in here, we have this option here. I would always recommend utilizing it, where we enable it, and then we have an expiration date to this exception. Of course, if it is permanent, you can go ahead and keep it and just exclude it on its own forever, but I would always recommend, wherever possible, use an expiration. The other thing you want to do is you want to scope this exemption to the resource that you want to actually exempt. So you don't want to just do it on the whole scope. This would exclude every storage account in this subscription from this policy. You can click the three dots here, and we have the option to then drill down to a resource directly. So if you were to choose the storage account resource, I don't know the storage account off the top of my head, but you can choose the resource group, and then ultimately you can choose the individual resource that you want to create the exemption for. The exemption details you can put in here, such as a valid use case for a storage account publicly accessible would be a static web page. You could put something like opening for a static web page. Down here, it'll show who created it. You would click Next. I don't have, under the basics, I didn't fill it all out, so my expiration was blank. You would create Next, and you would continue. So that shows how to create a exemption. You can also, again, this is the way I would not recommend doing it. You could disable the whole policy, but again, that would exclude it for everything for everyone. One of the other security optimizations that is big within Azure and is relatively new is the concept of Azure Bastion. So what Bastion is it's a fully managed PaaS service that allows you to RDP or SSH via the Azure portal. What this does is it restricts that access through the Azure portal, and it eliminates the need for you to have any sort of public IP directly on that virtual machine. When we're looking at how Bastion works, essentially the end user is going to authenticate to the Azure portal. This is all going to be done via TLS encryption. The Azure portal then connects to this Azure Bastion subnet, which is created, which has an NSG on it, which allows connection from the Bastion service over 443 into this separate subnet. This subnet then has the access via another NSG to connect to your VMs in a target subnet. Again, what this does is it allows you as the end user to connect through the Azure portal via RDP or SSH to your virtual machines without exposing a public IP or needing a public IP on that virtual machine. Some of the keynotes here is that a minimum of a 26/26 mask subnet is required for this Bastion subnet. Bastion, again, manages RDP or SSH, and it can be in local or peered virtual networks. This only works in any browser that supports HTML5. And then when planning your Bastion deployment, you need to understand the maximum number of hosts and sessions that it can sustain. Depending on your needs, you may need additional ones, or you may need to create additional Bastions. The default settings is 50 hosts on a standard SKU. With that, it represents 25 concurrent RDP connections per host, or 50 SSH sections per host. I'm going to switch back over to the Azure portal again and show you a demo on how Bastion works. So if we navigate to a virtual machine, we have this Accounts 101 virtual machine set up. First thing we're going to note here is that over on the right-hand side, we don't have a public IP. So there is no public IP. We can see that the virtual machine, of course, is up and running. Under this connect screen here, or from here, you have the ability then to select the type of connection option that you're going to choose. You could do RDP, which would download the typical file. And again, this would require you then to have your public IP or to be on the same virtual network and subnet that your virtual machine is running. In this case, we're going to use Bastion. This presents you with a logon window. I'm going to enter my username and password. I'm going to keep it opening in a new browser or a new window. We're going to click connect, and we're going to be presented with the virtual machine. When in the Bastion session, we do have the ability to copy and paste. However, we do not have the ability to copy and paste files or pictures from our source to our destination. So if I wanted to copy and paste code, I could do that. On the left-hand side here, we have these two arrows. We can open this up, and we can type in whatever we wanted or copy and paste from our local to our target, and then be able to run it in PowerShell or any other commands we wanted. Just to demonstrate this, I'll type something simple like hostname. Now this is going to be in this local clipboard on this virtual machine. So if I open up PowerShell, right-click, we can see that that did use the clipboard, and I'm presented then with the host name. Now, from the Azure portal, we have the ability to manage this connection. So if we go back to the Azure portal, go up to the top and type Bastion, we can open up our Bastion that we've deployed. And this is ultimately where we see all of our sessions, and we can see who's connected to it, how long they're connected, what username they're using, and the target IP, the protocol, and we have the ability to disconnect the session. So from here, I can see the session ID, I can see the type of the resource, I can see the target resource group, the username, the IP, and then over here we have the three ellipses. We can click this if we wanted to, as an administrator of Bastion, to cancel out this session, and we can click delete. I'll switch back to my virtual machine. Over here, we see it's almost immediate. We see that this is now unstable. And at this point, I cannot do anything within this session. So it was instantly terminated, and we will get in a couple moments as a user of this virtual machine, a window that pops up that says connection error. So this is how you can, as an administrator, cancel out any existing sessions that is on that virtual machine. With that said, we're going to turn it back over to Aman to talk about cost performance optimizations.
Thanks, Eric. So when it comes to cost and performance related optimizations, these two pillars go hand in hand. These are two pieces of the same puzzle. You want to optimize cost. You also want to optimize performance. So you want to reduce the cost, but you do not want to reduce the performance of your system. And while we are going through this particular section, think about which is more important for your organization. And the answer will vary from one organization to another, but we believe that there needs to be an optimized mix of each. Now, what we have seen is at most of the organization, when they start adopting Azure, there is a cloud sticker shock. The workloads bursting above agreed capacity is one of the main cause of this cloud sticker shock, where the organization was not expecting the amount of bill that they see, the spend they see on their bill. Over provisioning of compute or storage resources is another big one. Storage blocks that are no longer attached to compute instances, in a sense, we call these as orphaned resources, which should have been removed in the first place. They also contribute to the cost creep. Poor job scheduling, overbuying, or having unused reserved instances are some of the root causes of this cloud sticker shock. Now, when it comes to design choices and trade-offs, you always want to have an ideal environment, which is most secure, which has highest performance, it's highly available, scalable, it's recoverable, and is the most efficient environment. Now, why can't all the customers have this ideal environment? Because simply put, there are few downsides to it. There is cost to building this environment. There is time to deliver. It reduces your operational agility, your ability to deliver the solution faster as the requirements are changing in today's fast-paced environment. So you want to optimize the two things. You want to, without giving up operational agility, you want to optimize the cost. Now, how you can manage cost, how you can perform cost analysis, cost alerts, create budgets, and perform cost allocations. Eric will walk you through these items in a quick demo. Back to you, Eric.
Thank you. So I did also put in the chat window, just for everybody quickly, I did put another poll. We're just going to talk about here, which criteria have you guys used for your designs? Do you generally go on performance first, cost first, or do you generally optimize on a balanced approach? All right, so we're going to navigate back to the Azure portal here, and I'm going to go ahead and show a couple different items that we can do when it comes to cost. So first, I'm going to go to our resource group. So we're going to navigate to a resource group that we already have created. From here, we have the option to go to cost analysis. We can also do that from a couple different locations. We could do this from the subscription. We could do this from the cost and billing management blade. In this demo, I'm just going to show you from a resource group. So here we're going to click on cost analysis. And from here, we have the ability to see the cost analysis on this resource group. So here we can see how much we've spent. We can see the forecasted view. This is in Indian rupees. This is in Aman's old subscription, so that's why this is in rupees. But we can see all that information here of how the billing is currently and how it is expected to be. I'm going to navigate to the subscription now, and again show you the same thing. So we're going to go to cost analysis. And from here, we can also see a similar item just at the entire subscription level. What we can do as well, if we wanted to, is we could create a budget where we could have a notification sent to a certain group of people that we want to be alerted if a budget is either close to or is above a certain threshold. So we're going to navigate to budgets. We're going to go ahead and create a new budget here. So under here, again, we can see our scope. In this case, I'm going to scope it to the whole subscription. If we wanted to, we could scope it to a single resource group, or we could go all the way up to the management group. And here, if we wanted to, we could filter based on certain types. So if we wanted to filter this budget based on only a certain type of resource, for example, I want to create a budget on this subscription for anything related to SQL. I could use the meter category or meter subcategory to filter out to a certain type of metering item. In this case, I'm going to just leave it open for the entire subscription, and I'm going to create my name. So I'm going to say budget above 6,000. Our reset period, we have the options here of billing month, billing quarter, billing year, or we can do calendar month. The calendar month may not always match up with your invoice. So in this case, I'm going to do it based on the billing month, which again is based off your invoice. Sometimes these don't align, so you have to choose which makes sense for your organization. We have our creation date, so we're going to just do today, or this month, excuse me. We have our expiration date. If we wanted this budget to expire at a certain period of time, we could select this. And then down here, we have our budget amount. So down here, you can see this faint red line. This will adjust depending on what you put in your budget. So I'm going to say the budget is 6,000. So we can see here, and we can also see based on what Microsoft thinks our spend is going to be, kind of how that budget falls in line with what we have spent, along with what they think we're going to spend. Next, we have to set our alert conditions. So in this, we're going to create an alert which notifies somebody when that budget is at the 6,000 or a certain percentage of it. So here we're going to set our alert type. Our alert is going to be based on the actual, not the forecasted. If you wanted to, you could also set it anytime that Microsoft thinks your budget is going to go over. You can have it on the forecasted value. In this case, again, we're going to use actual. Now we're going to say that anytime that the budget is at 50% of our 6,000 budget, we're going to notify somebody. Here we're going to select our action group. This is going to be who we're going to notify. If you don't have one of those, you could always manage your action groups from here and create one. If you have any additional email recipients, you can put them in here as well. It is an asterisk, which looks like it is required. However, if you have an email in your action group, you don't actually need to enter this. So we're going to leave this blank, and we're going to create the budget. Now we can see that our budget above 6,000 is created. And if we scroll over, we can see any progress towards that budget that's happened since we created it. We've already pre-created this budget above, which is monthly infrastructure project budget. Here you can see we've achieved 17.07% of the budget, which in this case was 5,000. So we've spent 853. With that said, Aman, do you want to go ahead and share your screen and show the cost analysis preview feature?
Absolutely. So I'll also navigate to cost management and billing, and then to cost management. And in here, you see there are two types of cost analysis. The first one, the default one, that is without the preview. It gives you the ability to look at the cost analysis. There is a pre-built report for you, which shows you the actual cost, forecast, budget, etc. At the bottom, it shows you the same thing by service, by location, by resource, or rather resource group. Now this preview feature takes it one step further. Here you have two abilities. One, to create the cost analysis, whatever you want, and also to stick with that and create more of the same type or a different type in a tabbed format. For example, you want to look at cost analysis based on resources, you can do that. And while this is happening, or this report gets populated, you do not need to wait. You can click on new tab by clicking on this plus icon and select another type of resource or another type of report. You can even select the same type of report. But once it loads, you can filter the rows in a different way. For example, you want to look at a different month in this tab and then compare that with a different month in the first tab. So you can do that without navigating away from one view and then compare that with another view in a different tab.
One thing to note here is on the middle of the screen, you can see the insight. So the first time that you go into cost analysis preview, this insight is not going to be populated for you. It takes some time after you click on preview for Microsoft to go through your billing information and to get those insights based on what you've used and what you think they're going to use, along with the insights that they come up with for any billing alert. So after you click on it the first time and after this happens, if there is any insight, you will see it here and have the ability to dive into the insight by clicking on See Insights. Now, there might not be any. You might not have any discovered by Microsoft, but Azure does do a good job of finding any anomalies, and that's what will be shown here. And then the last thing, since you're on the screen, on the bottom, On the left-hand side, you can see another preview feature of cost allocation. Now, depending on the type of Azure account you have, this may or may not work. This works for MCAs or works for EAs. In our case, we cannot do this or show you, but really what this feature is, this feature gives you the ability to split up shared costs. So for example, you might operate in the model that your IT department runs the budget for Azure. However, you bill back based on certain usages. And let's say, for example, you have a VPN connection that establishes an on-prem connectivity, and that has a cost associated. Now, if you're billing back previously, you never had a way to split up those shared costs. What cost allocation does is it gives you the ability to go in and select resources that are shared assets and split that cost up in a different way. So you can choose how you split it up. You could choose to split it up equally. You could choose to split it up based on a percentage of usage. So you do have the option in here now to split up that shared cost to either resource groups or subscriptions, or really however you want it to.
Thanks, Eric. And I send it back to you, and you can show our audience more ways to optimize cost and performance.
All right, thank you, Ahmad. So moving on, optimizations for cost and performance. The next one that we can look at is reservations. So if you're not familiar with what reservations are, Azure reservations are a way that you can purchase a certain amount of something upfront in order to save cost. What that really does for Microsoft is it guarantees them a certain level of usage, which helps with their capacity planning. And in turn, for you doing that, they give you a discount. That could be 1 year, 3 year, or even in some years, in some resources, they give you the ability for 5-year reservations. The next one is going to be Azure Dedicated Host. If you're not familiar with what that is, a dedicated host really is you purchasing an entire host of hardware. This is available for virtual machines, so IaaS virtual machines. And let's say, for example, you run a certain series of virtual machine, let's just say the F series. Depending on your enterprise agreement, you may benefit from buying an entire host where you can license the physical CPUs in that host versus paying for a license for every Windows VM that you're running. So there are use cases and benefits to this. The host purchase is expensive, but there might be licensing optimization cost savings there. Right sizing. When you're doing a right sizing or creating a right sizing plan, you want to look at all the items in Azure that have any sort of ability to scale up, scale down, scale out, and make sure that they're right sized for what they're using. So that would be virtual machines. You might want to monitor the CPU and memory usage, or monitor the disk IOPS to make sure that the size is right, that it's not too big or too small, that the memory is allocated correctly, that you're not using too much or too little for your performance and your cost. And then your disk IOPS, you might want to monitor that to make sure that you're running on the right type of disk. Do you need premium? Do you need standard SSD? Or could you run on just standard HD? That goes for other resources as well, such as storage. Geo-replication does cost more. Do you need it? Those are items that you need to build into your plan. SQL databases. Do you have the need to run on a vCore model? Can you use DTU? Does it need to be premium? And then the same thing for app service tiers. Do you need a premium plan? Can you go to the standard or basic? Does it have enough features for what you need? So all of those items should be considered on not only the creation, but then also on a repetitive basis for your cost optimization plan. Hybrid use benefit, that's going to be allowing you to leverage the license that you guys already have purchased through your organization through Microsoft instead of paying Microsoft additionally for your Windows licensing or your SQL licensing. Next, you want to look at any orphaned items. We talked about that before, but again, what that means is any items that are left over that are not needed anymore. So that could be managed disks, public IPs, network cards, backups, snapshots, etc. Some of these items have cost, some do not, but cleaning up any orphaned item is definitely important either way. Next, decommissioning unused items. So that could be VMs or storage accounts, SQL, app service, really any resource in Azure that is sitting out there and not being used. You should decommission it or create a plan to decommission. And then lastly, scheduling auto shutdowns. So on dev and test servers, do you need them to be running all the time, or can you shut them down? Do you need to have shut down at a certain time for your business hours? And then you can also create automation runbooks that do auto start as well for your business. Lastly, auto scaling. So looking at the auto scaling, we can look at the ability to scale up or scale out app service plans. With that said, we're going to go ahead and go into another demo. When we were talking about reservations before, we were talking about the ability to buy something and have it allocated there for you to use. To get to reservations, you can go to the bar, search for reservations, and you can see your reservation blade. Here, you can go ahead and click Purchase Now, or you can learn about what the reservations offer. In this case, I'm going to click on Purchase Now. Here we can see all the different types of reservations that are currently available, and this list is ever expanding. So it's always good to click on this every once in a while and just see what your options are. Some of the typical ones that oftentimes see the most savings are things like virtual machines, SQL, Azure Synapse for data warehousing ability. If you were to click on any of these, again, with our type of subscription that we don't have the ability to buy reservations for this demo, but if you were to click on any of these, you would be able to see what Microsoft would recommend that you buy. You can either take those recommendations, or you could go and purchase something that you knew that you're going to be using for a new project and anticipate that usage coming on. Now we're going to turn it over to Aman again for talking about Azure Advisor and what that product offers.
Thanks, Eric. So now that we have seen at the security pillar and cost and performance pillar, we have seen many items that we can optimize. Now, Azure gives us some tool to give us the recommendations based on our environment. And those recommendations comes in form of Azure Advisor. Azure Advisor is an automated engine built right into the Azure and provided at no extra cost, which gives you recommendation on how to optimize your environment. Now, these recommendations, they fall into one of the 5 pillars: cost, security, reliability, OpEx or operational excellence, and performance. If you look at these 5 pillars, these are actually the 5 pillars of a well-architected framework. Therefore, this Azure Advisor, it ties perfectly into a well-architected framework. Now, if I jump into the Azure portal, now in here you can see I'm in an environment where I have a lot of recommendations. And directly on the overview page, you can see that the recommendations are in terms of cost, security, reliability, OpEx or operational excellence, and performance. Now, this is exactly what we saw in the slide. These are the 5 pillars that we were talking about, the 5 pillars of a well-architected framework. Let's look at some of these recommendations. If I dive into cost, I see various recommendations over here. For example, buy virtual machine reserved instances to save money over pay-as-you-go costs. Now, this engine, it looks at your virtual machines and then looks at which virtual machines have been running 24/7, and it makes sense to purchase a reserved instance and pay upfront for 1 year or 3-year commitment, and thereby saving money in the longer run. And you can see in the next column, it shows you potential yearly saving based on retail pricing. Similarly, there are various other cost related recommendations as well. Then if I navigate to security, I see different security related recommendations. For example, Microsoft Defender for servers should be enabled. Now, another thing to notice is all these recommendations have an impact assigned to them. The impact could be high, medium, or low. And you can see at the top, it shows you how many recommendations are of a higher impact, and then how many resources are impacted by these recommendations. If there are security alerts, those will be listed here as well. You can additionally add filter to filter these recommendations. Similarly, you will find other recommendations for reliability, OpEx, and performance. All recommendations is a culmination of all the recommendations under these different pillars. Now let me jump into my subscription. Within my tenant, I have a lot less recommendations. I do have some related to reliability, but none related to some of the other pillars. But two features I want to talk in my tenant are: one, advisor score. Advisor score is the overall picture that how is the state of your environment, looking at it holistically. Now, for me, the advisor score is very high because I have very less number of resources. If I click on the only pillar that for which I have recommendations, you will see Azure Advisor assigns a reliability score impact to each of the recommendation. If I would be in another tenant, there would be much more recommendations, and there would be different weightage for each and every recommendations, how much it contributes to the advisor score. From reliability perspective, if I enable soft delete to protect the blob data on a storage account, then the reliability score would jump up by 22%. If I click on this recommendation, I have the option to look at each and individual resource for which I can take the remediation action, and remediation details are also there. I can download this list as CSV or a PDF. I can even create an alert right from here. Another thing to notice is there is not in this subscription, but there is an option to perform quick fix for some of the recommendation. When it shows quick fix, those recommendations, you will be able to fix those right from within Azure Advisor. Alerts we saw where you can create those. Recommendation Digest is another feature provided by Azure Advisor. Recommendation Digest gives you an ability to create periodic reports that gets pulled and created and then sent to your inbox at frequent intervals. Now, this is what we talked when we were talking about the building blocks of a strategy. Now we are seeing how to leverage that using the tools provided by Azure. Condition, frequency, how frequently this should run, weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly. Usually we have seen monthly is the most used frequency. Based on your use case scenario or the type of recommendation you want to monitor, you can also have weekly or bi-weekly frequency as well. Then what are the different categories you want to select? You're only concerned about cost and performance during the delivery of a project. And then security and OpEx and reliability. Once the project goes from a dev environment into a QA environment or a staging environment. So you would want to select different categories based on your scenario. Select the language, select an action group. As we saw earlier, based on the action group, you can have different conditions, different notifications. You can look at that when creating an action group. The first one has an email notification, so I'll select that, which means that all the recommendations will be combined into an email. Then I'll get a recommendation digest in form of an email every month for all these categories. I can give it a name. I can say test digest, and then I can enable or disable the digest right here. I'll click on create, and that's how easy it is to get an email based on the recommendations that Azure Advisor tells you. Anything you want to add, Eric, or any caveats you have seen while working with this?
Yeah, I think the one thing to note is that sometimes within these recommendations, the recommendations you should not take as a gospel. You should always look at the recommendations and do your due diligence to make sure that they make sense for you and your organization. So, for example, some of the cost recommendations might not consider the fact that you shut down your VM. So they might be asking you to buy a reservation for a certain type, but they don't necessarily know that you shut your VM down half the day, and that buying a reservation will ultimately be missing out on half of it because it's shut down half the time. Or, for example, looking at the performance, they might not know that your VM is only used once a year for tax time. Your VM is running all the time for a tax software, but it's heavily used during the end of the year. It might recommend that you scale it down for an unused activity. And in turn, when your business needs it, you wouldn't have the compute available. So you always need to make sure that you're looking at the reservations or the recommendations, excuse me, and making sure that they make sense. You can also click, if you want to, on the configuration tab at the bottom. This is kind of hidden, but it is there where you can take your Azure Advisor and you can modify it based on what you want recommendations on. And then on the rules tab, you can modify for your performance to let you know or to take those reservation recommendations and modify them. So your CPU utilization, for example, in this case, it's looking at anything less than 5%. You could modify that. Maybe that's a little aggressive or not too aggressive. You can modify that for what you need. So in here, you can apply that different rule. We could say 10%. And then under the resources tab, again, we could modify those resource groups that are in scope or out of scope.
Thanks, Eric. Now, this is a very powerful tool, and Eric, just as Eric said, take the recommendations with a grain of salt and always see how they are applicable to your environment. Let's jump back into the presentation and let's look at the last pillar, that is support and management optimizations. Now, this is the pillar which talks about you want to optimize, but you also want to optimize your environment, not just from security, cost, or performance, but also from supportability and management of your environment in the longer run. When it comes to optimization from supportability or management perspective, these are the key items that we are going to talk about. Monitoring, all your resources should be monitored. There should be diagnostics set up for your key resources. The diagnostic data should be going into the right place, and you have some alerting mechanism set up and some audit mechanism set up for the diagnostic data. Certificate and app registration secret expirations should be monitored. If you are nearing the expiration date, you want to ensure that you renew those certificates, you renew the or recreate the app registration secrets. You also want to have activity and audit logs and some monitoring set up on those audit logs. You want to have alerts set up based on resource criticality. For your most critical resources, you want to be alerted when you are nearing the CPU consumption being overutilized. For example, more than 70 or 80% based on your thresholds. Similarly for memory and IOPS, etc. If any jobs within your environment fail, for example, backup, replication within Azure Site Recovery, automation runbooks, etc., you want to have alerting set up so that the right administrator, right people, they are alerted and they can take the remediation action. Any security event, if it occurs, bulk deletion of your resources, new addition in bulk that happens of the resources, PIM elevations, all the security events, the right resources should receive an alert for those security events. There's a feature called locking of the resources, which is available for almost all the resources. You want to leverage this locking mechanism and lock your high priority resources. Some of the examples include your Azure Site Recovery Vaults, your virtual networks, which are the backbone for your infrastructure, your key virtual machines, which support your business operations, etc. You also want to prevent accidental deletion or changes to the environment, which means you want to have soft delete enabled. And the logs as well. Resource guard is a new feature which, in addition to locking mechanism, provide an additional layer of mechanism wherein if somebody is performing backup or working with the backup data, they get only the required access that they need to perform the backup operations or the restore operations, but not to delete the backup data. You also want to have backup policies in place so that the key resources within a particular resource group or within a particular subscription, for example, if you have a subscription for prod resources, you want to ensure that there is a Azure policy which will make sure that Azure backup gets enabled for all the resources or all the VMs within that particular subscription. Also, your most critical resources, for example, your domain controller, etc., you want to have Azure Site Recovery set up and all the data being backed up in a geo-redundant fashion in a paired region or in a separate region, which is a few hundred miles away. Let's jump into the portal and take a quick look at a couple of items. I'll navigate back and I'll navigate to Azure Monitor. Now in here, what I want to do is I'll navigate to virtual machine. You can navigate to various other items, but what it shows me is what are the different virtual machines which are not monitored. This is important to you because it shows you that these are the virtual machines for which you do not have monitoring data. You do not have enhanced monitoring data. Not only that, it also gives you the ability to enable this monitoring right from here. Another item I want to show you in this quick demo is the ability to create the logs. For example, this virtual machine accounts 101. Under settings, it has this logs operation. Just like many other resources, I can delete the existing log and then I can perform operations like deletion of the virtual machine. If I have to create a log, it's as easy as clicking on this add button, providing a name for this particular log, providing a description, and then selecting the log type. There are two logs available. Read only, which logs this resources. You cannot change anything. You cannot change the SKU of the VM. You cannot do anything with this particular virtual machine. Most of the operations will fail, stating that there is a policy making it a read-only resource. Delete log, which makes this resource as do not delete resource. Now, if I hit OK and I navigate to overview page and I try to delete this particular virtual machine, I'll leave all the settings as default, hit delete button. It says fail to delete the virtual machine. At the last line, you can see it says please remove the lock and try again, which means my resource is protected from any deletion operation. This is critical for your critical resources to prevent any accidental deletion. Coming back to the deck and continuing with other optimization strategies that are there, you have different quotas. You have the soft quota and the hard quota. These are called service limits in your Azure subscription. And Eric will show you this in an interactive demo. The hard limits you cannot bypass, but the soft limit, you have a way to increase those soft limit, and Eric will show you that. You also want to monitor network space, address spaces time to time. You want to ensure that you are not running out of address spaces. You want to tag all your resources within Azure environment. This helps from reporting perspective, from cost analyzing perspective, and also pulling up different uh, view of your complete environment. You want to tag, for example, your public IP addresses with a justification tag, which will ensure that, okay, this public IP address is there, but this is the business justification for that particular public IP. Cost center is another big one. Uh, Project or product or the use of a particular resource is another one that you want to tag a resource with. As we said earlier in the session, you want to perform regular cleanup. Any unattached resources, for example, network security groups, NIC cards, data disks, OS disks, which are not assigned to any virtual machine or any subnet in case of NSGs, we call this as orphaned resources. You want to perform regular cleanup so that you delete all these orphaned resources. You also want to perform configuration cleanup. For example, availability set with less than 2 members should be deleted, and the VM should exist without the availability set. Boot diagnostic files without the VMs, it doesn't even make sense to have those. Performing cleanup will make sure that your environment is much more easier to manage. Any empty resource groups, again, clean those if there is no use case to have those in your environment. If you want to ensure that no configuration drift occurs, you can leverage different configuration management tools like Ansible, Chef, Puppet, or Microsoft's desired state configuration. You also want to leverage Azure DevOps wherever you can to perform your deployment in a streamlined fashion. If you are building multiple environments and you want to ensure that there is predictability and repeatability to the deployment, you can leverage Azure DevOps with other technologies to streamline your deployments. And lastly, there are new features that are added to Microsoft Azure recently. These features are Windows Admin Center and template specs. What these are, uh, to talk about those and show you the other features that we talked recently in a demo, I send it back to you, Eric.
Sounds good. Thank you for that. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into the demo. The first thing that we talked about, or Aman talked about, was quotas. So as we're talking about quotas, again, quotas could be something like a certain virtual machine size. It could be talking about the amount of something that you can deploy, and there's both hard and soft limits. To increase your quotas or to see if you're going to breach a quota, you can go to your subscription. You're going to click on your subscription, and you're going to go down to the quotas section. So down here, usage and quotas, this gives you the ability to see where you're at with the resources you have, along with the ability to create either a support request or to edit the amount of something that you are going to want to consume. So here, for example, we can see the total regional vCPUs that we have in our region US East. We're at 50%. Down here, we can see this individual size, DSV3, and we can see we have 30%, 6 of 20 are used. So if we want to increase a quota, what we can do is we can click here and we can request a quota increase. We can enter a new limit, and we will see the amount, and we can enter that. There are some of them, and like these here, if we want to increase standard storage managed disks in India, and we want this to go up from the 50,000 that we already have, we can't just edit that and request without needing a ticket. In this case, we have to open up a ticket, and you'll be able to see the differentiation between if there's a support request guy on the right-hand side or if there's not. The ones that don't have him, you can just edit, and generally these are auto-approved. So these ones, again, if it does not have the support request, you enter your limit, and generally these are auto-approved right from the screen. In this case, if you wanted to increase the overall number of virtual machines above 25,000, you would click on Open a Support Request, and you would be entered with the information. You would have to enter your problem and submit a ticket to be able to increase that quota. So next one, we're going to show, we talked about unattached resources. One of the new features that Microsoft released recently is the ability to clean up associated resources when deleting a resource. So for example, Aman had showed this before, but just to call it out specifically, if we go back to this virtual machine and we were wanting to delete this one, we could click on the virtual machine and we could click on delete. Now, previously, what you had to do before they increased this experience is you would have to delete the virtual machine, then you would have to delete the network card, then you would have to delete any associated data disks or OS disks. Otherwise, it would be left over. Now we can see here that it does show you that there's associated disks and network interfaces right from this deletion screen. So what we can do is we can expand, we can see the names. If there was multiple data disks, we'd be able to see another category here for data disk. And we can choose to delete this with our virtual machine. And we can do force delete if we wanted to, which will force delete it if they're in use by other, where you can have, in some examples like shared disks, you can force delete it. You would click I read and you would click delete. Also, when you're creating a virtual machine now, in the creation GUI, there is the ability to have it auto delete. If you click on that checkbox during the creation, when you go into this screen, those VMs and network cards, if you select that during creation, will automatically be selected for you, where you don't have to select it from this screen. So just really an increased experience when creating a virtual machine and also when deleting it. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to show the Windows Admin Center. If you're not familiar with what that is, Windows Admin Center is the ability to manage resources, generally used by system administrators, which is why it fits perfect in this operations and supportability section. So we have a virtual machine here. We've been focusing before on accounts 101. We're going to focus now on accounts 102. Accounts 102, we've set up Windows Admin Center, which can be found under the Settings tab and Windows Admin Center. It is in preview. There are some caveats when it comes to Windows Admin Center. Some of those are in the documentation that we have linked at the end, but one of the big ones right now is that Windows Admin Center from the Azure portal only works if your virtual machine has a public IP. So hopefully in the future they will change this experience where you don't have to have public IPs on your VMs to utilize this, because this feature is a very good feature for Windows Server administrators. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and open up Admin Center and show you what this is all about. So here we can click on Admin Center. We can click on Connect. We're going to see our public IP address here. We're going to click Connect. We're going to be prompted with a username and password. Again, we're going to enter our username and we're going to enter our password. We're going to click on Sign In. This is going to initialize the Windows Admin Center application, and you're going to be presented with the GUI. Now this, if you're familiar with Windows Admin Center, is exactly the same as what you would get when operating within a Windows Server environment. The only big difference, of course, is that you never had to log into the virtual machine. So you can run it all directly from the Azure portal. You can see your overview screen, you can see that there's a pending reboot, you can see the real-time metrics of CPU, memory, network card. You can see all the information just above the virtual machine, name, how much memory, etc. We can also do things like connect to it right from here with remote desktop or PowerShell. Now, all these other blades that are on the left-hand side all give different experiences, and I'll click through just a couple of them to show you kind of what type of information you can get from here. So from the overview screen, again, this is just a high level of everything. But there's also ones that you can interact with the virtual machine through the Azure portal. So for example, local users and groups. If I click on this, we're going to load the local user and group MMC add-in, and we're able to see, we can see the actual usernames and passwords that are on that VM. We could create a new user if we wanted to, give it a username and password. We could see the groups on that, and we can add those users into different groups on that virtual machine. And all of this is happening within inside the operating system itself. So this eliminates the need to actually log in as an administrator to perform administrative tasks. Another real good one is PowerShell. So if you wanted to perform queries or perform some sort of scripting, you could definitely do it right from here. Now this is similar to what experience you get from doing the run a command right from the Azure portal. However, this is interactive PowerShell, and this experience is much better where you can see in real time the response that you get back from the operating system as well. So going back to our hostname idea, we can type hostname. We can see that we're interacting directly with that host. Another one that has interactive is services. So if you have a service that's commonly stopping or you need to restart for any administrative task, you can do it right from here. A good example of that is, say, Azure Site Recovery, which we talked about before. Azure Site Recovery has some built-in services that need to be running in order for that product to work correctly. If for whatever reason they would fail or stop or need to be restarted, we could do that right from here without having to have our administrators log into that VM. We'd be able to navigate to our service. In this case, I'll just pick this one. We could pick this service and we could go ahead and start it. This one's not available. This is not on the VM. I picked a bad example, but any service that is available, you can actually click it, you can restart it, or you can take one that is already running, like this one, and you can modify the settings of it. So you can say how it's going to start, automatic. We can modify the path. We can pick who's going to start it, so what account is going to do it, and we can modify, of course, the settings of what happens if it stops. With that said, we have covered Windows Admin Center. We covered the quotas. Actually, there's one more demo I want to do, which is template specs. So a lot of what we do within Azure is based off the ARM template. So if you're not familiar with ARM templates, essentially it's a way to deploy a resource or create a resource based on a certain set of templates, which is oftentimes deployed through Azure DevOps, like Aman talked about before. Kind of the next iteration of that is called template specs. What we have in this demo is we created a couple template specs. So in here, we created a resource group where our specs are going to live, and we can see our two template specs here. Template specs really give the end user a couple different things. The first thing is they give the end user the ability to deploy a template from the portal with a GUI and a limited GUI based on what you put in your template. The second thing that they give is a template spec also gives the ability to control RBAC at the template level. So for example, if you want an end user to be able to consume the template to deploy it, but not the ability to modify the template, you can do that with the RBAC directly on the spec itself. And the third thing it gives you is versioning. So as you deploy as you're developing your templates, oftentimes templates or your different specs that you need will change over time. So with a template spec, you can version your spec, and then you can call those different versions based on your deployments. So I'm going to go ahead and show you, we have two of them here. We have a basic storage account and we have an advanced storage account. If I click on the basic, we can see here that we get presented with the overview screen. We can see what that template is about. We can see that there's a main template here, and we could click this and we could load that template if we wanted to see what's in it. We can also click on versioning. We can see that in this, we created two versions, first template version, increased minor enhancement, and we can put descriptions of what changed. We can see the date and the time and the modified dates of when those items changed. Here we can see the access control. So again, a template spec does have separate RBAC, so you can modify and give the ability for somebody to consume, but not to change this template. We can go and we could lock this template from being able to be changed by putting a read-only lock, or prevent it from being deleted by putting a do not delete lock. And then as an end user, we could also deploy the template. So this is where we can give the ability or not ability for people to modify certain specs. So if I wanted to deploy this basic storage account, I would click deploy. And in here, I'm presented with a very, very limited set of items. Everything else on a storage account creation that you get presented with through the Azure portal is hidden from the end user. So in this, all we're requiring from the end user is what we want it to be named, the storage account SKU, and here we can see that we did provide them with a limited set of SKU, not every option, only certain options. And then here, the location. In here, we presented certain locations. So again, limited set, not every available Azure option. So this is a basic SKU, a basic template, very limited set, not much capability in here, but it gives the end user, especially one that may not have enough Azure knowledge all the time to know what solution to pick, it gives them a limited set with allowing you as the creator of the template to put in parameters that are specific to your environment. If we go now in turn to the advanced storage account, this is an option for more of an advanced user that knows a little bit more about storage, and they might need to configure a little bit more for their solution. So they could go into here, click deploy, and now we're going to see that we have a longer set of items for that user to be able to deploy. So we could, in this one, do any container info, again, storage account type, and you can see we've expanded the storage account types now to include RAGRS and standard RAGRS. Down here, we also included in this template the ability to integrate into a network or to add firewall rules, and then the rule name. Here, days after modification greater. So this is talking about any lifecycle management. So here we can look at is enabled basically blobs, blob backend, archive time. So we can give the users the ability to either modify or not modify based on our template spec and how we modify that template. Template specs does have a resource blade itself. So if you go to the top and type template, you'll be presented with the option to get into that template spec blade itself. Again, I was just showing you from the resource group because when you create a resource template spec, it does go into a resource group, and I wanted to show you from a high level how you can see, modify, and then deploy them. So that brings us to the end of our presentation today. We're going to talk about a couple next steps that you can take after we're finished. The first of which is to, of course, create an Azure optimization plan. So from this, I would recommend that you go back to your business if you don't have one and start to look at how to create an optimization plan for your business based on your needs and based on some of the tips and strategies that we shared today. We want to also recommend that you set up periodic reviews. So again, talking about some of those strategies that we that we looked at. We want to have you utilize those in your business to review things like access, security, performance optimizations, etc. Next is going to be, of course, it's always great to enhance our skills. So take any relevant Azure certifications. So it's a great way to improve yourself and to show that you have the knowledge to your business and to your workplace. So a good example of something that you may want to take after this would be the Azure Administrator course. And then lastly, the recommendation would be, of course, to take a fresh set of eyes and look at your environment. If you haven't done this, I would definitely recommend hiring some sort of a consultant to come in with a fresh look and to look over all of your configurations, your plan, and really do a review on your environment to make sure it's optimized best. From there, we have all of our references that we talked about today. We have 4 or 5 pages of these different documentations, and we will certainly share these. Aman, how do you want to share them out at the end of this?
So we will be sharing the recording. We'll try to share that through a YouTube link, and then the deck along with all these links will be shared through our GitHub. So we'll follow up and look out for the announcement on our social, on the LinkedIn and other social places that we have, the information we shared earlier in the slide deck. So we will be sharing these soon enough.
Great. So from there, I see that some of the guests did have to drop off, but we're going to open it up for any questions or anything that you guys want answered.
And if you are watching the recording later, feel free to post your questions in the chat, and we'll try to periodically review the chat and help answer your questions.
All right. With that said, I think we are going to close this out. Thank you, everyone, for your time, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Goodbye.